And the next panel will be about business strategies in the use of industrial property for green innovation. The moderator will be Mr. Vinicius Bogéa Câmara, General Coordinator of Dissemination of INPI, Ms. Karina Müller from LES Brazil, and Mr. André Gorius from LES France and LES Italy. Please remember you should put your questions in the chat. And remember that the recordings will be sent to your emails. So I'll give the floor to Mr. Vinicius Bogéa to begin this panel. Thank you, Isabella, for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you are. Good evening. It is a pleasure to chair this panel, which is a challenging one for us in Brazil because it is very close to lunchtime. So I hope it's going to be very productive. I'm very happy to meet some old friends virtually here. But I'd like first to mention our speaker's resume, starting from the first speaker, André Gorius. I don't know if I pronounced it correctly. André Gorius is from the École Normale Supérieure. He has a PhD in chemical engineer with a vast experience in IP valuation. He has 30 years experience of professional academic experience. He's the president of AL-INVEST and a partner of Inotech. Besides participating in LES Italy and France. So we're going to listen to him speaking about the challenges of green technologies. And after him, we're going to have Karina Müller's presentation, who specializes in intangible strategies in issues involving strategic consultancy, negotiations, consultancy, licensing. He is the president of LES Brazil in 2021. He was the legal advisor in a law firm specializing in dispute resolutions in IP. He co-coordinated the Commission of Technology Transfer of API. And she's also one of the main speakers in IP and licensing for some time in Brazil. And like Isabella said, I'll reiterate that the speakers should stick to the time of 15 to 20 minutes. And the questions can be asked in the chat. At the end of the presentations, I'm going to select the best questions, the most exciting questions, so that we can have a nice discussion. So, Professor André, you have the floor.
Thank you. So I hope everybody will understand what I'm going to say in English. I'm based in France, so I'm effectively not with you, but in the same time zone, but it's a pleasure. And I would like to thank you for the invitation. So what I'm going to talk about, my background, as you understood, is more industrial and business oriented than specialization in IP. But of course, business and IP are two worlds where there is no chance to divorce. They strongly are interlinked and they work together. So I'm going to, if you could, somebody could put the next slide, or do I have the control, or what's going on? Thank you. So I would like to start from the start. United Nations has proposed 7 sustainable development goals, which are the 17, which are the goals that we all together should look at anytime we do any innovation or try to work in any innovation field. And you can see them here: no poverty, zero hunger, good health, and so on. And it ends up with partnerships for the goals. So there is basically everything. And the main impact of all these goals is to give us some highlight on what we are supposed to work if we want to our world to become more sustainable, essentially in all the dimensions. And contrarily to what we could think, it's not because we talk about gender equality or better health or well-being or etc. that we should not, that there is no relationship with any technology. So that's really one of the important things, is that UNO has decided to rank things in this way. There are many other ways of looking at all these things, but these at least give a frame. So I will go to the next slide and show you what really then is green technology innovation and linked to this climate change, which was worked upon by the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, who classified sectorial and systemic innovations or option mitigation into 7 categories. And you'll see later that they're strongly linked to these sustainable development goals. Basically, the 7 categories are, you could imagine, of course, that energy is one of them. So energy in this list is the first. It, of course, takes into account all the components of the energy production, plus the mitigation of the carbon produced during these steps, which generally all require some CO2 let's say, release into the atmosphere. Agriculture, forestry, and other land use, which is FLU. Here again, carbon sequestration or CO2 sequestration more globally is very important. It is one of them, and it goes until renewable, of course, material supply and so on. Urban systems, so we're in mobility there, where urban land use and spatial planning to integrating the sectors, the strategies, and innovation. That's one of the big things that are going on right now, and I will give just talk about a few examples in a few minutes. Building, from demand size management to change in construction materials. We continue to use materials today, which really there's a question about mining sector, where mining here is I will talk about it in a few minutes. There is so building, we continue to use materials today which are not necessarily globally green, but the definition of green, I will wait. You please wait a little bit until I tell you what should be behind it. It's not only at the surface that it should be green. Transportation, of course, that's, of course, we all know these big things, of course, light-duty vehicles, electric vehicles, and so on, but includes also biofuels. And the industry, from energy efficiency to CCS and carbon capture and storage, as I said before, and carbon capture and utilization, releasing CO2 in the atmosphere, knowing that C and O2 are two important atoms in the world, and not being able to do anything with this CO2, then either capture it or just release it in the atmosphere, is something that is going to be looked at, and it is looked at. So in all these domains, there is a need for sustainable innovation in technology, but also in the way that technologies are implemented locally and which SDGs they serve. That's what IPCC is saying. So the next slide will show you just a little bit of what they showed. I encourage you to look at this table. The report is rather big, but this table is just, I think, 1 or 2 pages. I took out two sectors in there. I could have taken agriculture and other things, but I decided to take these two things because I'm going to discuss about it in a few minutes. So you have you have wind energy, you have solar energy, bioenergy, hydropower, geothermal energy, and nuclear power, and carbon capture and storage. And what you can see here on the right-hand side of this diagram is the relationship with SDGs. So as you can see, the only one which is really a little bit empty is number 4 and 5. And a little bit, and number 10 also. So there are technological impact on most of the SDGs. That's the first remark. They also classified in the type of relations that are possible. You can see on the right-hand side, a plus means there are synergies between the SDG and the technology that we talk about, wind energy with SDGs, trade-offs, and both synergy and trade-offs if you have a little point there. Blanks means that either there has been no assessment or there is no impact. Confidence level, well, the light color is low confidence and the dark color is high confidence. As you can see, it's rather mixed. It is rather a mix of medium confidence and high confidence, meaning that we have today the means to be able to challenge all these different, let's say, SDG, attaining the SDG, and making sure that at the end, all these SDGs are covered by the technology, the green technology that we are going to develop. So multiplicity of technological fields, competence is needed. That is clear. There will be a lot of competencies. I will comment about that. There will be industrial strategies, and not only industrial, and also multiplicity of synergies between all them. SDG 4, quality education, and 5, gender equality, generally poorly addressed in these technologies, in these sectors, energy and industry. If you look at the full report, there are other ones which, of course, address these. But these are the ones that I want to talk about because this is my field. Sorry, yeah, next slide. So, what are the there are some implications of all that. There is a good question about mining. Well, mining, we have metals everywhere. And we have, it goes from rare earths to even simple metals like iron or whatever. And the consensus today is that whatever you do, recycling is one option. But at the end, when you look at the projections of how the GDP of the world is supposed to change in the future, then you will need to continue to dig out minerals from the earth, and so from the ground, and so we need to mining is going to be a big issue. And I take this example because I wrote that in all activities we have replaced horses and human power by machine consuming energy. Digging into a mine is many steps, and most all of these steps require a lot of energy or require water, which if you want to recycle it needs energy and so on. The message here is that whatever we do, we have transformed a world where we used our own power or horses or whatever more natural power or say more biological power. We have replaced that into almost all domains, and I think all domains, by energy consumption. The example of any activity that we do goes, for example, if you go to fundamental needs that we have food. Well, today we use a lot of energy to produce food. At some time, well, there was a guy in the fields. Today it's much more mechanized, and so we use a lot of energy to transport it, to create it, then to sell it, and so on. Lodging, of course, when we create a house or whatever building to help us survive, then we again consume a lot of energy. Mining is one of the examples. Cement and all these things, and even wood will consume energy to be carried to the place where it needs to be used. And of course, moving between different places. We take planes today, as my grandfather took a horse. And that's today one of the things that we have to think about. Anything we do, and there is, I mean, there are a lot of discussions around that. Anything we do is at the end a consumption of energy. The problem with energy is that there are laws in physics which say that whatever energy you produce or you consume, well, you dissipate part of it. That means that if I want to use 100 or create 100, I will lose something. And the reality is that the reality is that when you look at the way that we use energy, we are very, very inefficient. I don't know if it's normal or not, but there are theories saying that whatever we're going to do, we're going to work in a way to maximize our dissipation of energy. I'm not going to enter into the details. If there are questions, I'm ready to, of course, answer that. So what we have to retain here is that the energy is really at some point the key point. Even if we all talk about other technology like mining, like hydrogen, like electricity, even artificial intelligence and so on, energy is the bottom line of all that. Then the second point is that globalization has gone very far, and that we have seen, for example, during the crisis of COVID, at least in Europe, that we had to reshape all our supply chains from food to, of course, machines, to gas, which gas is used to produce energy, which itself is then used to produce other machines and so on. So this is a really important question. That is, the globalization has led us to a fact that today, whatever we do, we are going around the world. And well, I just have to look at when I go to the sea down south in France, how many ships I see with things which are going to be ending up either in the shops in the floor in a shop here around or on in my plate when I eat. That's a real question. So supply chain management is key, and the good news is that the crisis of COVID has really helped us to optimize. Well, we had no choice. If we wanted to continue to eat bread in France, and you know how important bread is in France, we had no other choice than finding another way than importing supplies from Eastern countries. Okay, can you, yes. So this basically about technology. I think the message is generating hydrogen is a very good idea. It's important. Green hydrogen is a good idea. But even with solar energy, then we're going to dissipate energy. We're going to need to make the solar panels. We're going to need to transport them and so on. And this at the end, there's a law in thermodynamics saying that we're going to dissipate energy. So we have to be very careful. We don't have to, I mean, of course, we're going to do that. We're going to do green hydrogen, but we have to take into account what costs and investments it implies on the whole chain, from the creation of the energy to the final hydrogen consumption and usage and so on, and storage and so on. Electricity is, of course, one of the big deals. Today, many people are working in artificial intelligence. I'm myself involved in many projects concerning AI, but well, if there's a power failure, I'm down, and AI is down too. So basically, this is the message. About mining, there's the question of rare earths. Rare earths are rare. These things are essentially sometimes a lot of consumption of rare earths are going to be done in engines, in motors, electric motors, and so well, there is the question of recycling of these magnets, and that's a big help. So that's about technology. I'm going to quickly now about the question of innovation IP processes. This is a real life example. IP is not, at least from all the companies I know, really very recognized as an important asset. It's more a cost. So this is a real discussion about with a CEO or with several CEOs. How do you manage your IP? Well, no problem. We work with the best IP law firms. And who is in charge in your company of the IP? I told you, the law firms. Okay. I don't think if I'm a CEO also.
Eu não acho que se fosse presidente.
Sorry?
Desculpe.
Sorry, I didn't understand that. Okay. About filing patents, I see two extremes. One is we have purchased 3 patents 5 years ago, 10 years ago. What else do you want? It's a lot of money. We're fine. The second one is I visited 12, 7, 10 prospects last week, and please file immediately 8 patents next week because we'll launch JDAs with them, ADAs or whatever. And so that's the kind of attitude I really see. These are real cases. About filing or keeping secret, well, we need to protect our in-house developed scientific production, specific production process, file immediately a patent. When then we tell them that, well, in a few months, everybody will know because the patent will be published. So the answer is stop, no file. In reality, so next slide, please. The way to work on that is really when we have explained them, and that's really awareness. And I know that Karina is going to talk about this also. They come back to us and say, help me get organized and define my IP strategy. I shouldn't, nobody should outsource their IP strategy. It's your strategy, which must be the company strategy, which then leads to IP strategy. Sometimes even help me hire an IP manager. I've helped hire 2 in the last 2 years. Let's build a roadmap and manage it, and so on and so on. So the question is a question of dialogue. And the question is, true for anything, and it's in particular true for green technologies where tech transfer is going to be key, because many companies will not have the means to be able to develop everything by themselves, and at the end, let's say mitigating the question that it's very nice to be green today, but is it going to be profitable? So next slide, please. So when we have explained them, no, I'm going to skip this one. I'm going to skip this one and go to the next one, which is more. So the many technologies, solutions to reach SDGs already exist or are under development. The general rule is to underuse them. Basically, technologies owners may be concerned by uncontrolled misuse of their technologies. Green hydrogen is a good example, and food innovation and so on too, reputational risk and so on. People see risk before seeing the interest of doing it. Transferring these technologies to adequate industrial partners is going to be difficult, but it's a primary objective to everybody. The last paragraph here is about an example. In Europe, there is the impact licensing initiative. What they basically do is they try to put in place a program where the value is shared between the licensee and licensor, and in the best possible way, integrating everything of the social needs and the energy needs and all that stuff. It's always a question of convincing people that not keeping for themselves the technologies, but being able to show them to and give them to and use to other companies is important. I'm gonna next slide, please. So then there are a lot of challenges in there. I know I'm going quick because there is limited time, but there are a few challenges. The first challenging question is to understand the SDG or ESG impact of an IP portfolio. It should be done as rigorously as possible. So IP valuation here is key. I've never seen any way of convincing a CEO, a CFO, or any management committee than putting numbers on some paper, on some Excel spreadsheets, and showing them that the value of what they could draw out of that can be important for them. The real driver at the end is free cash flow. It's difficult to measure its impact, the full carbon print tip, the full ownership cost, of course, the energy, as I said before, all the energy questions which have to be integrated into these long-term economic benefits. And then we have a real issue. I don't have any bottle of water here because I'm in a hotel. I didn't take one, but my bottle of water consists of 2 things, the bottle and the water. The water, Mr. Evian in Evian, about a few kilometers from here, pays 0 for the water that he digs out of the ground and then puts in my bottle. That's one real problem. So how can I, and it's true for oil, it's true for minerals, they're accounting in our accounting system for 0 cost. That means that whatever technology we're going to develop and want to value it and say it has a huge economic impact to generate free cash flow has to compete with raw materials which are free. How can it be competitive? That's a real challenge. So I let you think about it. And there are many people today thinking that basically the whole economic accounting system should be changed, but I think I'll be there a long time since when it will happen, but that's just a guess. That means that for IP management, the focus on technology, of course, will continue. There will be new ways of licensing to be adopted to enable rapid spread of new technologies, technology transfers whenever it's possible, whenever it's needed. Because of the supply chain issues, intercompany partnerships involving multiple actors will be needed. If you want to optimize the supply chain, you need to start from the raw material and you need to end up at the final usage of the product, and of course include the circular economy all around that. That's a lot of partnerships, that's a lot of different actors, and if everybody doesn't agree, well, it's just not going to work, or it's going to be more complicated, less economic. And intra-company economic rules will have to be adapted, royalty rates, stacking, all that stuff, but that's more technical stuff for us guys. And of course, we would like to have accounting evolutions in this case that will imply necessarily evolutions of the value of the IP. I think we're done. Then there is an interesting site who also does interesting things. You have Solar Impulse here and impact licensing. Next slide, I think we're done. Yeah, we're done. So thank you very much, gracias. I'm ready for, if you want, okay, I'm ready for the next part.
Muito obrigado, Mr. Gorius,
Thank you very much, Mr. Gorius, for your great explanation.
Só instante.
Just a second here, please. Okay. I had my translation turned on. Okay, thank you very much for your brilliant explanation. I believe that you were quite fortunate.
I agree with the comment I saw here. Huh? I fundamentally agree with the comment. This needs a specific panel. It's a question of mine.
He's speaking in English, Vinicius, the IP and green technologies. On the one hand, the supply chain and the undeniable fact that energy will continue to be a central topic for innovation, and not only for IP valorization, but the issue of energy is a challenge, a permanent challenge for the efforts at innovation. And your last slide, I think, combines perfectly with the presentation that Karina Müller will be sharing with us, which is the challenges associated with licensing, new forms of licensing, and the care that should be taken with licensing strategies, which oftentimes are overlooked and neglected. So, Karina, take it away. You have the floor. You have the next slide. Good morning, good afternoon to everyone, all the survivors here of our panel. As Vinicius said, it's already lunchtime here in Brazil, so it's a huge pleasure to share this panel with André Gorius, who's always an expert who shares great insights with us. It's a pleasure to share here with Vinicius. Vinicius chairing this panel has spread the message of intellectual property here in Brazil, which is so important for Brazil and for the entire Latin American Caribbean region. And good afternoon, everyone. I would like to greet and salute the people from Latin America and Caribbean. It's a huge pleasure to participate in this event, and I'm dazzled by the initiatives in Brazil and all the other Latin American countries together, because at the end of the day, Brazil is not just a giant piece of land, an island, rather it was part and parcel, and Latin America is an important hub for creation and investment and innovation. And so we have to join forces. And I wish to thank AL-INVEST Green and likewise for the invitation together with the INPI here in Brazil and the entire team, Mercedes, Mujica, and all the people who are involved in this. Of course, I'm going to be speaking in Portuguese, my mother tongue, but I also wish to leave clear to all our colleagues from the neighboring countries that any discussion in Spanish here in this panel discussion is possible because oftentimes the language can be a barrier, but it's not going to be a barrier in this case. And we have simultaneous translation as well. So Greg, Gorius raised several key issues concerning how business is done and practical issues and problematic issues with regard to green technologies and the internal structure of companies. So I'm going to raise some practical legal issues, which likewise are linked and related to what Andre has shared with us. So as we saw, one of the Sustainable Development goals for us to move forward with the urgent climate agenda has to do with industry, innovation, and infrastructure. So this is important because for us to move forward on this agenda, we also need to consider the building of infrastructures, industrial processes, and innovation for them to be inclusive and sustainable. We can no longer follow the previous model. So how do we do this? We can, John Donne in the 17th century, a poem that begins with, "No man is an island," John Donne said. "No man is an island, no human being is an island, apart from the rest and detached from the rest of the world." Although sometimes we'd like to isolate ourselves, sometimes we're desperate with things that are happening, but actually in our agenda, community agenda, we need to join forces. So increasingly so, it's urgently so, this sense of community and convergence, we can see this increasingly and impelled by this climate agenda, and the green technologies have come to help us to implement this. Why? Because I cannot move forward with the SDG 9 if I don't establish effective cooperation and scale up these green technologies that are being built and created and implemented and developed every day, constantly. We need to know that we need to create cooperation, which involve more in actions and scaling up and disseminating them. And intellectual property has come precisely for what? To guarantee that this be done not only structured and organized, but also be attractive for everybody involved, because intellectual property means what? Important assets, intangible, immaterial, intellectual, whatever you want to call them, but everything that we create, it is subject to a kind of protection. And intellectual property brings this tool, this possibility. So in the licensing programs, I believe that it have to be increasingly intense, increasingly international, between and interrelated between countries. They are based on intellectual property assets. So the first step is to know that you need to protect. Intellectual property is not a cost, it's an essential investment in my own business and in these licensing programs. So when we move on to negotiations, so you have an important asset where you want to share and license it for royalties and so forth. There are two extremely important phases in this. One phase is the preparation, and the other one is the negotiation. People who've participated in this, and I think almost everybody has participated in negotiations of intellectual assets, licensing and technologies and so forth, whatever, knows that the negotiation part is an intense part of the process, and oftentimes it lasts months and even years, depending on the type of the way it's performed, who's involved, the interest in the parties and so forth. But the negotiation, it is only successful if you have done a preparation stage, which is even more intense and important than the negotiation part itself. Not important in the sense of that's going to give me, but it's important to have a more fluid and objective negotiation than on the table and what you want to achieve with the process and the preparation. It's not just a kind of preparation of that business that one is conceiving and designing the intent to propose, the intent to negotiate. It involves prior preparation, which I mentioned previously, which is that a protection of what one creates. So this is essential. Afterwards, we move on to a preparatory phase and move on from there to negotiation. So what's important in these relations? It's extremely important to spend time and investment and involve all the areas, interested parties or the stakeholders who have something to add to one's company, to one's business, or to organization. You need to identify precisely the interests involved, which technological areas and which business areas that you can offer, because these cooperations, as they've already said, they involve these assets, intellectual assets. So for this step to also be fruitful, one has to consider some prior preliminary documents that we're going to be talking about later. They're the ones that protect. I'm not talking necessarily about the protection of the assets. This has to be done already. I'm talking about the documents, preliminary documents, which are essential in one's relationship to one's partner. So one also needs to put on the table, in one's internal table, you have to understand what are the tangible and intangible interests for each potential agreement. So on the side of the tangible ones, what are the economic benefits? I'm talking about economic benefits, not only financial benefits, because oftentimes these cooperations, these agreements, these arrangements, whatever you want to call them, they involve payment, obviously, but they can also involve other kinds of economic benefits. And one also needs to understand the intangible interests. I'm talking here about building relations. In the climate agenda, one needs to build lasting relations. One needs to increasingly understand that they are part of a whole. Somebody is scraping it on the top of a table. There's another microphone open. How the other party conducts business. So each arrangement, each actor you participate in, it.
Karina, desculpa te interromper, é que a gente está. Eu queria só reforçar aos presentes que mantenham seus microfones.
Emphasize, have people keep their microphones muted, because we can hear some terrible background noise that's interfering with the meeting. I apologize. Can I continue? So one ends up creating know-how and improve in building this kind of agreement, which is so intimate in a lasting relationship. We're talking about a purchase and sale contract of a product or a vehicle or something that's in our daily practice. I'm talking about veritable lasting relations. One cannot reach this kind of transaction thinking only and evaluating just the favorable conditions for that. You also need to understand what is unfavorable, what one wants to avoid, the possible barriers, obstacles, results that you do not want to reach, because the truth is that an agreement is not just a honeymoon. An agreement is made of a lot of discussions and fights and so forth and arguments. The more you stress in the middle of the preparation, the iceberg that I showed before in one of my first slides, the more time you dedicate to understanding this, the better you reach the negotiating table in better conditions. And with regard to green technologies, as we saw here, Gorius said, Andre Gorius, this energy issue, although we are seeking alternative solutions, as Andre Gorius discussed, for decarbonizing our world, that we need. It's urgent to decarbonize the world. Look, that sometimes, depending on the situation, depending on the technology alone also involves a industrial process which is strong in terms of pollutants. So all this we have to take into consideration at the negotiation table. And since establishing consensus of these negotiations can even interest, because on the other hand, you can have, on the other side of the table, you can have relevant information in the so the exchange, it's very common in this kind of partnership, exchange of improvements or exchange of information. There are programs for annual improvement plans to exchange in meetings. This is increasingly intense. And moving on, what are the documents, the preliminary documents that you need to take into consideration when I move forward? When I move forward, I want to propose an agreement. I am ready to negotiate, to reveal and explore a possible arrangement to publish a kind of knowledge or exchange it to receive information from the other side of the table. So before any kind of announcement, you need to be sure on both parties or all the parties involved, because oftentimes there are multilateral agreements involving more than two parties, that information that is exchanged and revealed is going to be backed by non-disclosure agreements, NDAs, confidentiality clauses in a preliminary agreement and so forth. It's going to be important to have this in mind. So then I'm talking about, it's not confidential. It's not going to prevent that person from using or not using, but I think that it organizes what the parties are discussing, and it establishes obligations for both parties. But it's important just to recall that sometimes it's confusing sometimes that an NDA is a preliminary agreement. It's not going to regulate the development of a technology, a joint technology, or licensing of a technology or technology transfer. It's going to regulate just what the preliminary phase, when you want to explore a possible partnership, and one needs to have the ease in negotiations. So the NDA serves that purpose, other documents serve that purpose, and oftentimes in the NDA, you can see that there is a potential business between the two parties. Sometimes they're not prepared to move on to a full agreement, a more complex agreement. GTA, joint development, JDA, technology transfer, sometimes a joint venture in their situations, and business ventures and so forth. And so, but I do know that I want to pursue the negotiations. The NDA is no longer the definitive documents are going to regulate all of that, but I am not still in a complex agreement. Sometimes what we use is a term sheet, a letter, a memorandum of understanding, an MOU, some other document, preliminary document, which establishes some basic conditions for that arrangement, for that cooperation, and a time frame for the parties to be able to negotiate a final agreement, a definitive agreement or complex agreement. And sometimes these preliminary agreements, the term sheets or whatever, they have an exclusiveness clause. This is relevant in negotiations. Exclusiveness in what? We, the parties, during X months, a year, or whatever, we commit to negotiating exclusively with the other party with regard to this potential technology business that we're going to be negotiating between the two parties over this X period. So these are documents which provide comfort and relief in these situations. So it's necessary to know that these documents are essential in establishing a subsequent definitive and more complex agreement. So let's imagine that we've reached the situation we've announced, and oh great, we're going to move on to our actual cooperation. Then a decision was made by the parties, and we are therefore going to begin a negotiation. And the second part of the negotiation, the second part, which already began before because these things are already on the table, and therefore you begin to look at what kind of agreement you want to reach. Is it a licensing agreement that you're going to share the technology with third parties? You're going to authorize them to explore. You're going to scale up. At the end of the day, you cannot always do this alone. It's more in this part in the bottom that you have to scale up energy, technology. Yes. Okay, so the licensing agreement or even technology transfers, because sometimes you want to transfer technology to a person to be able to build a plant or to do how to use that technology. It's easier to replicate this with partners than alone. We're not going to overlook or ignore that these agreements are extremely relevant, which are universities and with research and development organizations, cooperation with the universities. Sometimes a potential technology which is not ready to go to the market, but you can't test it. I cannot develop it to the end. So these kinds of cooperations with the universities help us with that, with R&D institutes. And Brazil has a law, a specific law for this, on this, regulating this, and not only Brazil, obviously, but all. I would imagine that this is something on the world scale. This kind of cooperation cannot be overlooked or ignored, and they're extremely useful in the development of the final development of technology for a product or a solution to be able to reach the market. There are also what we call as JDAs, joint development agreements, joint development agreements, JDAs, where both parties join for what? To develop, each one employs a part of a solution to reach that the market at the end. There are also the kinds of joint cooperation, which are not especially development, but we cooperate jointly to be able to have a solution on the market. There are numerous different documents that we have that are available for us to be able to scale up the use of technologies in the world, not only at the local level, but worldwide, globally. This legal part, oftentimes people face it as a kind of boring part, but it's essential to work on these minutes or drafts, makeshift drafts or hasty drafts or that haven't been read by everybody. They have to be read them. Involves the legal department, business, technical departments, and everything. It's not just the legal department or the business department or the technical department. It's everybody that has to study these draft agreements. They're essential to guarantee what? That what was negotiated or what the parties are interested in launching on the market that's going to be faithful to the draft. And oftentimes, but a draft comes, a contract comes later to be assessed. And you can see that the contract expresses something that is totally different from what the parties said that they wanted. So it has to be a clear draft document where the parties can understand it. Therefore, to exchange the drafts back and forth, that expresses all the doubts, clears up all the doubts and all the questions and issues, that it clears up everything that was not resolved. You can't say, okay, I'm going to have a clause that is only applies to me. This kind of situation always ends up in problems. So on the issue of the win-win situation, we have to consider the conditions which are win-win situations. So because it doesn't do any good to have a contract that is only good for one side. It's not a contract in a partnership. It's not a good contract for licensing of intellectual property assets. So it's necessary to have this mindset, a global mindset, a community mindset that of convergence, that of the climate agenda. And all of this is possible to do and having business with numerous economic benefits. It's IP that's going to guarantee this. So other issues in the draft, which are legal details and so forth, it's necessary to spend some time on these drafts. It's interesting, this quote here by Jan Ramsey: make your document visually attractive. The marketing process should never stop. And that's true. It's so frequent for us to find contracts which we are weep just to look at the wording. I signed the contract for the cooperation. It's great. I'm ready to go out to the market in the world with my technology. But you have to know that you have a responsibility for the contract, post-closure, post-signage or signature. So we need to, signature rather, you have to make a list. You have to have a spreadsheet. You have to have a document which explains and expresses what was agreed on. So you need to understand that tasks that need to be met after the signature, the signing of the contract, that cannot be postponed. Oftentimes you have milestones in the contract, in the licensing contract or technology transfer. And any of these arrangements, you list them in there because the final objective is to have a solution in the market to scale it up and to obtain the economic benefits and other benefits that we're going to be obtaining in an agreement like this. So you have to know what to develop concrete plans, to know whether they establish concrete plans for exploring the technology and other obligations in the agreement. You have to know what kind of management systems have to be developed, what was the governance that was established by the contract in that arrangement, if there are bureaucratic administrative requirements that you have to meet. So this is all post-closure obligations, responsibilities. Signing an agreement, it is only the beginning. And look, that you underwent a huge preparatory phase, negotiating and all the protecting the assets and everything, but it's only the beginning of a partnership that's been established, a kind of relationship which is intended to be a long-term relationship. And it's important for all people who work in the negotiation, who will be part of the team that's going to execute, that's going to implement that, and actually that it becomes a market reality, that they be aware, the contract conditions, it's good to have a spreadsheet with the main conditions and an issue of a spreadsheet for governance, even doing training for these people, for them to understand for what, if everybody on the same page and to avoid non-compliance and everything, because the fact that there's an agreement, it's possible to have a fight.
Yeah, this is a human reality, and I think that ever more in this world where we have this urgent need to, get together to understand that we have a common purpose with all our creations, innovations, and that together we are going to be able to, reach what this agenda may be. We don't know. We need to have a target of reaching, because when we have this target, we move forward more and we improve the scenario little by little. And I think that the sort of disputes that come from this type of agreement, okay, which this is going to happen, okay, we are going to have divergences and other issues. Even for those, you need to have more creative clause than there you establish, the arbitration process or, the jurisdiction, but a clause that you could establish, conflict resolution committees. It's actually quite common. It's much easier for you to try and solve. Remember, this is a cooperation. This is not an agreement for a fight. So it's much easier for us to establish mechanisms of how solving possible disputes within the cooperation, so that it does not stop, it does not, finish, instead of, going for a more drastic conflict resolution possibility. So this is a little bit of what I had. And I'd like to finish with the same poem of John Donne, saying, why do teachings actually make us fold? But they do that for all of us as a community that is going to come together and use intellectual property as a way of ensuring the continuity of all living things on this planet, and doing so in a sustainable manner. Thank you very much. Thank you, Karina, for your presentation. It's very inspiring, informative, in the sense of not just because of your final comments, but also because it draws our attention to something which seems to be obvious, which is, legal leadership associated to agreements with some very clear clauses and very well-defined conflict resolution mechanisms, because of course every innovation could have some risk, sometimes risk even bigger than the risk of innovation itself. I think though that some of the questions on the chat, I think we still have 5 to 7 minutes to ask these questions actually. So I have a question which was asked by, let me see, just a second. Okay, this is a question that came from Silvana Flores from Green Metallurgy Technology. She asks, why the mining sector? And this is a question that I think is good for Monsieur Duhios. This is a question associated to mining. Why is the mining sector not considered in those IPCC categories? After all, the smart mining issue is an issue brought by the World Bank in 2019, and it is key for decommissioning strategies. I'd like you to talk a little bit about this question, if you could, sir.
The answer of why, I have no idea. I mean, I'm not IPCC, but maybe it is. I just showed, if I was better prepared, I could have a look at all of them now. But however, you are absolutely right. Mining is going to be one of the key challenges. I even say it's a wonderful challenge, because we all know that we have no lithium or maybe zinc, because that's coming out now. We will have no batteries, and we can talk about anything we want, but if we have no batteries, we're not going to store energy. Be it in car or hydrogen and so on. So yes, of course, and for solar waves, so for solar energy and of course wind and so on. So yeah, it is a wonderful challenge. It is strategic. I'm sorry, I can't answer your question why it is not there. If it is not there, maybe it is. I can answer. But what I know is that there is a lot of discussions about the difficulty to recycle these metals, because I visited a lithium mine once in my life, not too long ago. I mean, it's not enjoyable to visit this type of place, because I mean, you feel that there is an issue there, and you have issues to solve, no doubt. It's a wonderful challenge. It's an important challenge, and I'm also quite sure that these development of technologies will be possible only if there are transfers of technologies, if there are people thinking about the way to recycle better the lithium chemically, physically, whatever you want. Just to give the example of lithium, and that it's also again a question of partnership and of supply chain.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gorius. Okay, there's another question that I think could be good for Karina, also from Silvana. And she asked, what's the difference between a MOU and a LOI? So letter of intent and MOU, a memorandum of understanding. What is their practical difference? Okay, practically speaking, I think there's no difference, okay? I mean, there are some jurisdictions, okay? So some countries that understand that MOU is not binding, but the LOI is not really binding, but you can solve that in a clause, or sometimes you don't want it to be binding between the parties. In other words, you don't want that to become those dubious situations, kind of establish the MOU can actually be a solution. But practically speaking, I understand that they are very similar documents. And depending on where you are, I'm going to use MOU or LOI. So it depends on the jurisdiction, because one is binding, one is binding. Anyway, it's basically a useless lawyer discussion. Okay, so yeah. Okay, great. Okay, another question, which kind of goes from this question, okay, from Silvana. So when you talk about joint venture, what type of patent license should you have, the exclusive or non-exclusive? If it's a joint venture, so two parties or more, you know, they got together to set up a company, formally speaking, an enterprise where they're going to manage, have transactions, trade, license this intellectual asset, the patent, whatever. It seems to me that in these cases, it makes sense being an exclusive patent, because if not, I could go into conflict between the purpose established for that joint venture, okay, for that enterprise, and that can even kill the purpose of the joint venture, because if the owner of the patent decides to explore the patent without the others knowing about this is actually a critical point in licensing agreements. I need to establish whether or not this is exclusive. And when it is exclusive, I need to make it very clear that it also refers to the possibilities in relation to the owner of the tech. Because if not, you say that it's exclusive for that licensee, but the tech owner can also license this. But then you could have problems in the market, because you're going to have different prices of the technology, and you could kind of hinder, compromise the licensee. And for me, the best path in a joint venture is for this to be exclusive. Okay, but this is my opinion. So, Isabella, I have 1 minute. Isabella, if you do allow me, I have a question. I know it's complex, but I'd like to very few words here, Karina, as well as Professor Gorius, because we know that a lot of the times nobody knows how much innovation is worth, how much a patent, a brand is worth, you know. This is a challenge that has really given innovators nightmares and creators also, you know, creative people. But my question though comes from the Brazilian point of view, okay, Karina, and then Europe, of course, Professor Gorius. The universities, okay, public universities and the science and technology institutes funded by public money, so funded by the government, in your opinion, are they ready, or are they on the path of knowing how to gauge, assess their patterns? And in other words, how far the universities and these institutions, how far are they from the standard in relation to appraising and giving due value to their patents?
You're the expert. André, go ahead.
Want me to talk? I mean, I didn't hear it. Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So, oh, no, you can hear me, right? Okay, yeah. Well, I don't, well, it's very, very, I mean, I have a worldwide experience, that's international, not worldwide. I can tell you it's very different from region to region. There are some countries, and US and Europe are, let's say, beginning to be able to, but only beginning to be able to. In Asia, there is essentially today, there is a lot of work in the ASEAN zone where Philippines are trying to do things, Singapore and so on. So I'm not going to elaborate on all the details of these things and the context I have. It is very, very, let's say, different from country to country and from business model to business model of these different institutes and universities. What I can tell you that in universities whom I work in the US, in France, in Vienna, you know, in Austria, I'm going to be next week in Vienna because of these things. There is a real will to go into that and to assess that technology is not only, of course, on the technology part, but also on the global impact that they can make, and have a building indicators which are dedicated to choosing different between these different technologies that they can put on the market. There is a global, let's say, will to do that. That anybody, I've seen no institute today, none of them which I work. I'm just limited in time and connections, but I've seen none which is really at the level of some, let's say, specific startups who would do that essentially because it's their business model, or companies who would do that. That's what I can say. We can discuss it a long time. I have many examples, but basically it's coming. The good news is that it's starting. This is a good news. Since about 3-4 years.
Vinicius, eu achei essa pergunta brilhante, eu não vou me alongar muito.
Yeah, Vinicius, I thought your question was brilliant. I'm not going to go on for too long because valuation is Andre's expertise, but I like to say that in Brazil, we still have a long way to go. We have some brilliant initiatives in Brazil, Shirley, Coutinho, and so many others. But I think that sometimes in academia, there is somewhat a bit of difficulty to understand that what you're creating there has a market value, and there is a value for you to, you know, add economic benefits for the university, for the R&D center, for instance. And I think that this is a very relevant discussion. And Brazil needs to prepare more for this and use our internal examples, such as I mentioned, Shirley, Elizabeth. But I think that we need to change the Brazilian mindset for that. Okay, thank you, Karina. Thank you, Professor Gorius, for your explanations, you know, your presentation, for the issues and the insights that you have brought to us also, who, you know, have made this event even more stimulating, bringing more questions and things for us to think about, you know, feeding our debate. And Isabella, you have the floor again. Thank you once more on behalf of our audience to Mr. Vinicius Bogéa for moderating this panel and for the presentations. Madam Karina, Haidar, Müller, and Professor Andre Gorius. Our fourth and last panel today